"Mom, sit down. Don't make a scene." Those were my daughter's words to me, her sharp whisper slicing through the music and chatter of the wedding reception like a cold blade. My hand was still clutching the bouquet I'd bought her that morning, white lilies wrapped in satin ribbon, trembling now as I realized half the room had turned to watch. But I hadn't even stood up. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't done a thing. All I had done was exist her mother on the day that was supposed to be the proudest of my life. Then came the hammer blow, as she raised her champagne glass for the traditional toast. My daughter, my only child, my Sarah, smiled a dazzling smile at her new husband's family. Her groom's mother dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. His father beamed like the proud king of a small empire, and Sarah said it loud enough for every guest, every cousin, every neighbor, every stranger in that hotel ballroom to hear today. I finally stand with my real family, his family, not hers. A hush fell. Forks froze in midair. The DJ, a kid in a cheap tuxedo, fumbled with the playlist and cut the music too soon. The words echoed in the silence, bouncing off crystal chandeliers and the marble floor like they'd been carved into stone. Not hers, not mine. My throat burned as though someone had poured fire down it. I could hear my pulse in my ears, a drumbeat of humiliation. People glanced at me, some with pity, others with the cruel delight that always accompanies public shame. My sister-in-law whispered to her husband too loudly, "I told you she doesn't even claim her mother anymore." A distant cousin I hadn't seen in 10 years raised an eyebrow like this was the soap opera she had secretly hoped for when she RSVP'd. And then the laughter came. Not all at once, but a trickle from the groom's side like champagne overflowing a glass. His uncle chuckled, then his aunt, then half the table, until I was drowning in a sea of amusement at my expense. Sarah clinked her glass against her new husband's, her smile never faltering. My daughter, my baby, the child I had worked 3 jobs to raise after her father left. The girl I had stayed up all night with during fevers, who wore dresses I stitched from clearance fabric when money was so tight I sometimes skipped dinner myself. And now in front of 200 people, she had erased me with a single sentence. I tried to speak, but my lips stuck together. I reached for my water, but my hand shook too hard to lift the glass. That's when the groom's mother, elegant in her sequined navy gown, leaned across the table and laid a hand on Sarah's wrist. "Darling," she cooed, voice dripping with victory, "we are honored to be your real family." The word real struck like a slap. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Still, I couldn't look away from my daughter's face. She looked radiant free, like she had finally cast off a burden. And that burden was me. Around me, whispers swirled like smoke. "She's cut her mother out, didn't even thank her. Poor woman must be awful." The humiliation was complete. The knife had gone in, twisted, and snapped off. But before I could crumble, something unexpected happened. A chair scraped against the marble floor. My granddaughter, only 12 years old from my late son's side, stood up from the children's table. Her tiny fists were balled at her sides, her cheeks flushed red. "That's not fair!" she shouted, her voice breaking the tension like a lightning bolt. Every eye turned to her. The laughter stopped. Even the priest seated quietly near the head table lifted his head. "She's your mom." My granddaughter continued, pointing straight at Sarah with the righteous fury only a child can summon. "She raised you when nobody else would. She bought your stupid prom dress when your dad was gone, and she sold her car so you could go to college. And now you say she's not your family. That's evil." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The groom's relatives shifted uncomfortably. The DJ nearly dropped his headset. Sarah's smile faltered. For the first time that night, her mask cracked, and I saw something in her eyes, fear maybe, or guilt. But she covered it quickly with a roll of her eyes, muttering, "She doesn't understand." But everyone did understand. They had just been too polite, too cowardly to say it. And now, a 12-year-old had done what none of them dared defend me. The priest rose slowly, smoothing his robe, and cleared his throat. His voice carried with calm authority over the shocked silence. Perhaps he said, "This is the right time to share a letter that was given to me, a letter from the bride's mother." A collective shiver ran through the room, a letter from me. I hadn't planned for this, not exactly, but I knew instantly what he was talking about. My secret, my safeguard. The one thing I had prepared in case this day turned into exactly what it had become, a public execution of my dignity. And as the priest reached into his folder, I sat up straighter. My heart pounded. The room leaned in. The game was no longer just theirs to play. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 68 years old, and I never thought I'd be sitting at my only daughter's wedding reception, watching her erase me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out. But maybe to understand why that moment cut so deep, you have to know who I really am. Not just the woman in the wrinkled blue dress sitting alone at the back table, but the mother who carried her through storms no one else saw. I wasn't born into wealth. My parents ran a small diner on the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio. Greasy menus, chipped coffee cups, neon sign that buzzed louder than the jukebox on Friday nights. That was my childhood. By the time I was 15, I knew the smell of bacon grease better than I knew the scent of perfume. College. That was a dream for other girls. I went straight from high school into marriage. Sarah's father, Michael, was charming in the way men sometimes are when you're too young to know better. He promised stability, a house in the suburbs, and forever. Forever lasted 7 years. One morning, he left with a suitcase and a note that said, "I can't do this anymore." No address, no forwarding number, just silence. I was 31 with a 3-year-old on my hip, a mortgage payment due, and 72.43 in the bank. That's when survival became my middle name. I cleaned houses in the mornings. I worked at the nursing home on 3rd Street in the afternoons, changing bedpans and spoon-feeding residents who had no one else. At night, I stitched clothing for neighbors, hemming jeans, patching coats, anything for a few extra dollars. 3 jobs, sometimes 4 when the holidays rolled around. Sarah never knew the nights I skipped dinner so she could have a full plate. She never saw me cry in the laundry room because the power bill was overdue again. She only saw her lunch, packed her clothes clean, her birthday cake on the table, even if the frosting came from a discount can. When she turned 16, she wanted a prom dress like the other girls. The cheapest one at the mall was $189. I had $60. So I sold my grandmother's locket, the only piece of jewelry I'd ever owned, worth more than sentiment. I told Sarah the dress wasn't that expensive. She twirled in front of the mirror, beaming. That smile was worth every empty hole left around my neck. College was worse. She got into Ohio State. Tuition room board, it all added up to numbers I couldn't even say without feeling dizzy. $28,000 for the first year. I laughed, then cried, then applied for every loan grant and night shift I could find. I sold my car, took the bus to work, and cashed out the little retirement savings I had. When she walked across that stage 4 years later, I thought maybe it's worth it. Maybe all of this was so she could stand taller than I ever did. And yet here I was being told I wasn't her real family. Do you see why it burned? People like to say, family is everything. But what happens when your family decides you are nothing? As I sat there, humiliated at her wedding. Flashes of those years kept crashing over me like waves. The night I walked home in the snow because I couldn't afford a cab. The afternoon my hands blistered from scrubbing hospital floors. The Christmas when Sarah unwrapped a used bicycle I'd painted red to make it look new. Every sacrifice I made was supposed to be an invisible thread tying us closer together. But somewhere along the line, those threads had been cut, one by one, until she stood there in a white gown declaring herself free of me. And maybe, just maybe, I had to admit I had seen this coming. It wasn't the first time Sarah pushed me aside. When she graduated, she told her friends her father helped pay even though Michael hadn't sent a dime. When she bought her first car, she didn't mention that I'd co-signed the loan. When she got engaged, she said his family really supported them while I sat at home staring at an invitation that arrived 2 weeks late. Still, I swallowed it all. That's what mothers do, right? We swallow our pride, our hunger, our grief, so our children can rise higher. But the thing about swallowing too much is eventually it chokes you. At the wedding, surrounded by gold-trimmed plates and champagne flutes I knew she hadn't paid for, I realized I was choking. Not on food, but on silence. And yet part of me stayed calm. because buried deep in my purse was a folded letter, my handwriting on the outside, my heart on the inside. A letter I had given to the priest the night before just in case this day became unbearable. A part of me had always feared Sarah might try to erase me in front of everyone, so I had prepared, quietly, carefully. The letter wasn't long, but it carried truths Sarah couldn't run from about her childhood, about what I had done for her, about the blood and sweat she'd so easily forgotten. And if I'm honest, it carried something else, something Sarah didn't know yet, something about money, about property, about the house on Lakeview Avenue worth $2.8 million that was still legally mine. She thought I was powerless. She thought I was disposable. She had no idea. As I looked at her across that glittering ballroom, I felt the rage rising, but I also felt the strange calm of someone who knows the storm isn't done yet, because I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The band started playing again, but it was too late. The poison had already seeped into the room. Every smile looked sharper now, every laugh cut deeper. I sat frozen at my table, surrounded by flowers that smelled too sweet food, that suddenly tasted like dust and whispers that clawed at my skin. The ballroom was beautiful. Gold accents shimmered on the walls, crystal chandeliers glittered above us. The kind of place where families take glossy photographs they frame for generations. And yet in that moment, it felt like a cage built for my humiliation. I tried to focus on breathing. 1, 2, 3. But every time I inhaled, I caught the scent of roasted chicken and garlic mashed potatoes, the exact meal I had cooked for Sarah 100 times in our old kitchen. Back then, she'd say, "Mom, you make it better than any restaurant." Now she sat at the head table laughing with her new in-laws like I was just a stranger who wandered in from the street. "Don't look at her," I heard someone murmur behind me. It's embarrassing. I tightened my grip on the tablecloth, my knuckles white. Then the first cut came. The groom's father, a broad-shouldered man with a booming voice, stood and raised his glass. "To my son and his beautiful bride. We welcome Sarah into our family with open arms. Finally, she belongs somewhere she truly fits." The crowd clapped. Glasses clinked. Every cheer felt like a slap across my face. Finally, she belongs. What was I then? The woman who raised her, clothed her, fed her, a placeholder until the real family came along. Before I could even swallow that insult, another voice cut in. Sarah's maid of honor, a girl she'd met in college, leaned into the microphone. Sarah always told me her fiancé's family treated her better than anyone ever had. It's like she finally got the parents she deserved. Laughter rippled through the room again. My stomach twisted. The parents she deserved. I thought of the years I worked double shifts at the nursing home so Sarah could go on school trips. I thought of the mortgage I almost lost when I lent her money for her first apartment's deposit. And now in front of everyone, I was being told none of it counted. My water glass trembled in my hand. I prayed silently for it to end, but it didn't. The insults weren't whispers anymore. They were bullets fired straight at me, dressed as jokes wrapped in toasts. The groom's aunt, with pearls dripping from her neck, raised her voice over the crowd. "Well, I suppose we'll take good care of you now, Sarah. After all, you've been carrying dead weight long enough." Dead weight. The words lodged in my chest like shards of glass. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. A few heads turned. Someone stifled a giggle. And then Sarah herself sealed it. She lifted her microphone again, her cheeks flushed from champagne. "It's true," she said with a playful shrug. "My life has finally started now that I've married into this family. I feel free. Free from what the questions screamed inside me. Free from me. Free from the mother who had held her hand through every nightmare. The silence in my heart was so loud I barely heard the rest of the laughter. But the sting grew sharper when I realized how public it all was. Cousins from out of town, old neighbors who remembered Sarah in pigtails. Even my boss from the nursing home had come, her eyes wide with disbelief as she watched me sit there being stripped of dignity in front of 200 witnesses. That's when I noticed him. At the table across the room, a man in his late 60s, dressed in a red flannel shirt that looked out of place among the tuxedos, leaned back in his chair. He wasn't family. I didn't know him. but his eyes burned with something familiar anger. He slammed his fork down loud enough to echo. "Shameful," he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. Absolutely shameful. The room shifted. People glanced his way, then quickly looked back down at their plates. No one wanted to take sides, but I felt it, a spark of validation. A stranger, someone with nothing to gain, had seen me. He had recognized the cruelty for what it was. I clung to that tiny flicker of hope as if it were oxygen. But Sarah noticed too. Her jaw tightened, her eyes darted toward me like daggers, and then with a cruel little smirk, she leaned into the microphone one last time. "Mom, why don't you just relax tonight? You don't have to worry about anything anymore. You're not responsible for me. Not my bills, not my house, not my life. That's all behind us." The crowd clapped again, thinking it was lighthearted. But I heard the edge beneath the words. She was cutting me out piece by piece and making sure everyone watched. Behind us, waiters wheeled in a towering cake, 5 tiers tall, covered in sugar roses. Guests oohed and awed, snapping pictures. But all I could see was the knife on the table gleaming under the lights, waiting to slice it apart. And for the first time that night, I wondered if they were planning to carve me up the same way. Because it wasn't just humiliation anymore. It felt like erasure. And I had no idea why my daughter wanted me gone so badly or what she stood to gain by pushing me out. But soon, I would find out. And when I did, everything would change. The clinking of forks against china faded. All I could hear now was my own breath, shallow and uneven, as the spotlight of humiliation burned hotter with each passing second. The ballroom that once sparkled now felt like an arena where I was the unwilling gladiator and the crowd had come for blood. Sarah leaned back in her chair at the head table, sipping her champagne with the smugness of a queen who had just banished a peasant. The groom's family laughed at her little jokes, nodding like obedient courtiers. And me, I was the punchline. It started small snide comments dropped like breadcrumbs. "Don't let her sit too close to the gifts," someone whispered a cousin from the groom's side. "Who knows what she might take home?" Laughter bubbled up again. "She doesn't even own her own place anymore, right?" Another voice chimed in. "Must be hard living off scraps." I froze. How did they know the house? The one on Lakeview Avenue was still in my name. But yes, I had been renting out the basement to make ends meet. Did Sarah tell them? Did she laugh about it over dinner with her new family, turning my struggles into a dinner table anecdote? And then came the direct blows. The groom's aunt raised her glass again, this time her words dripping like poison. Well, thank heavens Sarah found stability. We wouldn't want her ending up like some people. Drowning in debt, barely hanging on. The laughter was crueler this time. Louder, sharper. I wanted to vanish. To fold myself into the tablecloth and disappear. But Sarah wasn't done. She leaned into the microphone, tapping it lightly until the screech cut through the room. Actually, she said, her voice lilting, playful to anyone who didn't know the blade hiding beneath. Maybe it's time I told everyone the truth. My stomach dropped. Sarah's eyes locked on me, glittering with something I couldn't recognize anymore. "Growing up wasn't easy," she said, putting on a fake tremor in her voice. My mom, well, she tried, but she never really provided the life I deserved. I had to learn to fend for myself, to find people who would actually support me. People like the family I married into today. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded sympathetically at her as if she were the poor victim. Others turned their eyes toward me, judgment heavy in their gaze. I wanted to scream, "I sold everything for you. I bled for you." But my throat locked. Then the hammer fell. Sarah raised her glass high and delivered the line that shattered whatever was left of me. "My real family is here, not there." She didn't even look at me when she said it. She gestured toward the groom's family bathed in golden light at the head table, and she left me in the shadows. A hush blanketed the room. Even the band stilled. And then someone, a smug young cousin with too much wine in his system, laughed and shouted, "Guess you're off the guest list for Christmas, huh?" The room erupted in laughter. It was merciless, like a pack of wolves circling the weakest member. My hand shook so violently the water glass tipped, spilling across the linen. Gasps turned to chuckles. The groom's mother leaned in, eyes wide with mock concern. "Careful, dear," she said sweetly, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "We don't want another accident. Maybe you shouldn't be trusted around glasses." The implication was clear. Old, useless, a burden. Heat rose in my cheeks. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. If I cried, they would win completely. And then, as if to crown my humiliation, the groom's father stood again. From this day forward, he boomed, "Sarah belongs to us, and we will take care of her. She doesn't need anyone else." The ballroom shook with applause. Guests stood clapping, cheering as if they had witnessed a coronation. I sat rooted in my chair, drowning in shame. But in the midst of the chaos, I felt a tug on my sleeve. My granddaughter, her eyes wide, brimming with tears, whispering so only I could hear, "Don't let them do this to you, Grandma, please." Her words pierced the fog of humiliation like a knife cutting through rope. For the first time that night, I sat a little taller. Not enough for the room to notice, but enough for me to feel the spark returning. Still, the cruelty continued. A waiter placed the cake knife in front of Sarah and her husband. She lifted it, grinning, then glanced toward me. "Mom," she said into the mic, "don't worry, you don't need to cut the cake this time. You've cut enough corners in life, haven't you?" The laughter was thunderous. My granddaughter's hand squeezed mine tighter. The stranger in the red flannel shook his head in open disgust. And I realized something. This wasn't just about humiliation. This was about erasing me, my role as her mother, my sacrifices, my existence. Sarah wanted me gone not just from her life, but from the narrative of her success. She wanted to rewrite history, and I was the villain in her story. But she didn't know what I had given the priest. She didn't know what truths I had hidden away, waiting for the right moment. And as I sat there swallowing the last bitter pill of public humiliation, one thought burned through me, steady and unshakable. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The applause finally died down, but the sting lingered like salt on an open wound. I thought the humiliation might stop there, that they had wrung every last drop of shame from me. But I was wrong. They weren't done. They wanted to strip me bare, not only of my dignity, but of everything I had ever owned, everything I had ever built. It started with a toast. Again. This time, the groom's brother, a smug young man in an ill-fitting suit, grabbed the microphone. He swayed a little drunk on champagne and arrogance. To Sarah and Tom, he slurred, "May you never have to struggle like some people in this room." His eyes flicked toward me. The implication was obvious. The guests chuckled. Some clapped half-heartedly. I clenched my fists in my lap, nails digging into my skin. Then came the real blow. The groom's father, who had already spoken too much that night, cleared his throat and motioned to a waiter. The young man hurried over with a small envelope, thick, official-looking, with a seal on it. "We thought tonight would be the perfect time to share some good news," the father announced, puffing up like a peacock. As of last week, Sarah and Tom are now the legal co-owners of a new home, a fresh start for their new life together. The crowd clapped politely, but then he added his eyes, cutting straight into me. Of course it's a home that wouldn't have been possible if Sarah hadn't made the wise decision to separate from certain financial entanglements of her past. The room buzzed with whispers. I felt my stomach drop. Financial entanglements. My house. My savings. Sarah beamed, sliding her hand into her husband's. "It's true," she said sweetly. "I've moved everything into joint accounts with Tom now. No more old debts, no more messy ties. We're starting clean. Old debts, messy ties." That was me. And then like a knife to the chest, she said it outright. "The house on Lakeview. It's ours now." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Heads turned toward me. A few even clapped, thinking it was wonderful news, but my world tilted on its axis. What did she mean it was theirs? That house was in my name. Yes, I had let Sarah stay there after college. Yes, I had added her name to a secondary deed so she could manage bills while I worked double shifts. But I had never signed it away. Had I? My hands shook as I replayed the memory that afternoon last spring when Sarah shoved papers at me, telling me it was just refinancing to get a better rate. My eyes blurred from exhaustion after a 12-hour shift at the nursing home. I had signed where she told me. Oh God, I had signed away my house. The whispers turned to open comments now. Well, she doesn't need a big place at her age. Better Sarah gets it than the bank. Serves her right, she can't manage bills anyway. The cruelty was casual, as if they were commenting on the weather. My face burned. My chest ached. Sarah smiled wider, basking in the glow of applause. She had done it. She had not only humiliated me, she had taken the one thing I had left the house that represented every hour I had ever worked, every sacrifice I had ever made. And she had made the theft public. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. My granddaughter squeezed my hand, whispering frantically, "Grandma, say something. Tell them it's not true." But my throat was locked. The groom's mother stood now, adding her poison. "Don't worry, dear," she said to Sarah, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "You won't end up like some people who lose everything." Her eyes landed on me sharp as knives. "You've built something real, something lasting." The irony was suffocating. I had built something lasting. They had just stolen it. And the worst part, no one stopped them. Not one cousin, not one friend, not even the priest who sat quietly at the edge of the stage, hands folded as if waiting for the right moment. The guests all shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Except the man in the red flannel. He stood again, his chair scraping loudly across the marble. "What the hell is this?" His voice thundered through the silence. "You people celebrating, robbing your own mother in front of everyone?" The room froze. Sarah's face turned crimson. She forced a laugh. "Sir, you don't understand." My mother agreed. She signed the papers. The man pointed a finger at me. Did you really?" My lips parted. The truth clawed at my throat, but fear held me still. If I admitted I'd been tricked, it would mean admitting I had been blind weak. So I stayed silent, and in that silence, Sarah's victory felt absolute. The guests turned back to her, clapping again as if she were the heroine of some triumphant play. My humiliation was complete. I wasn't just a guest at her wedding. I was the sacrifice. But deep inside, beneath the shame, something stirred. Because while Sarah thought she had taken everything, she had forgotten one thing: the letter. The one the priest still held, sealed and unread. And in that letter was the truth, not just about my sacrifices, but about the assets she didn't even know existed. She thought she had won, but the game wasn't over. Not yet. The applause rang in my ears, but I barely heard it. My daughter's voice, so proud, so cold, replayed over and over, the house on Lakeview. "It's ours now." It was as if she had driven a nail into my chest, hammering with every syllable. I sat there still as stone while the laughter and clinking glasses swirled around me. But inside, the memories began to surge, uncontrollable, relentless, pulling me back to the beginning. I remembered the night the furnace broke in that very house in the dead of a Cleveland winter. Sarah was 10, shivering under 3 blankets. I had less than $40 to my name. I boiled pots of water on the stove, carried them upstairs, and placed them in her room to give off steam. All night, I lay awake on the floor outside her door, terrified she would get sick. I remembered the time she wanted a school trip to Washington, D.C. The fee was $600. I didn't have it. So I worked overnight shifts at the nursing home for 3 weeks straight. I missed sleep, missed meals, but I scraped it together. The look on her face when she boarded that bus, proud, happy, made every aching bone in my body worth it. And I remembered the worst night of all. The night her father left. Sarah was 3. He packed his suitcase in silence, shoving shirts into the bag with the violence of a man already gone in spirit. I begged him. I told him we could fix it, that Sarah needed him. He glanced at me cold and tired and said, "She'll be fine. You'll manage. You always do." And then he walked out the door. He wasn't wrong. I did manage. I had no choice. But the cost. The cost was me. For years, I put myself last. My shoes had holes while Sarah's feet wore new sneakers. My stomach growled while hers was full. My hands bled from scrubbing, cleaning, sewing, while hers held textbooks I could barely afford. And still she looked at me now as if I were nothing more than a shadow in her perfect story. Dead weight, the aunt had called me. The words still stung. But I wasn't dead weight. I was the engine. The invisible force that carried Sarah forward when she was too small, too fragile, too young to walk alone. The cruel irony was that the stronger I became for her, the weaker I appeared to the world. They saw only a tired woman in thrift store dresses, hair graying, hands rough. They didn't see the steel it took to survive 3 decades without collapsing. And maybe Sarah never saw it either. Or maybe she chose not to. I stared at her at that head table, glowing in her white gown, champagne glass in hand. She looked so confident, so sure of herself. But I knew what she had forgotten without me, she would never have gotten there. And yet in her mind, I was disposable. That thought twisted something inside me. For the first time in years, anger, real burning anger, rose up, hotter than shame, stronger than sorrow. Because I wasn't weak. I had endured too much to be weak. The house on Lakeview. Yes, maybe I had been tricked into signing papers. Maybe Sarah believed it was hers now. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know about the savings account I had quietly built from decades of small, secret sacrifices, tips saved from cleaning jobs overtime, pay hidden from even her eyes. She didn't know about the life insurance payout from my sister who had passed 5 years ago, leaving me $420,000. And she certainly didn't know about the old deed to my parents' diner, a property on the edge of town now worth nearly $1.7 million thanks to new development. I had been careful, silent, always underestimated, and maybe that was my greatest strength. Let them laugh. Let them sneer. They believed they had taken everything, but I had more left than they could ever imagine. I glanced toward the priest who still sat quietly, his folder resting on his lap. He hadn't opened the letter yet. My words, my truth were still waiting, and when they came, they would tear through this golden ballroom like a storm. But for now, I kept still, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. I took a slow sip of water, forcing my hand to steady. Across the room, the stranger in the red flannel watched me, nodding slightly, as if he could see the battle raging inside me. My granddaughter leaned close, whispering again, "You're stronger than them, Grandma. I know you are." Her tiny voice was the rope pulling me back from the abyss. She didn't know the details, didn't know the secrets I still held, but she believed. And maybe that was enough. The humiliation burned, yes. The loss of my house stung like an open wound. But under it all, beneath the wreckage, something unbreakable remained. I wasn't finished. Not yet. The laughter had thinned, now tapering into the dull buzz of conversation and clinking glasses. But for me, every sound in that ballroom still felt like a dagger. My daughter had humiliated me, stolen from me, erased me, yet I stayed silent. And still, I wasn't broken. Because I had a secret. It was small, almost laughably so. Just an envelope. White ordinary, sealed with tape, my handwriting scrawled across the front. I had slipped it to the priest the night before, my hands trembling as I pressed it into his palm. "Read it only if the moment feels right," I had whispered. He had studied my face, then nodded solemnly. Now, hours later, that envelope sat tucked inside his leather folder, lying flat across his lap. His fingers tapped it lightly, almost absent-mindedly, but I noticed. My heart leapt. Because in that envelope wasn't just words. It was evidence. Proof. The kind no one could laugh away. I reached for my water, my hand steadier now. Around me, the room pulsed with celebration, dancing, drinking the clatter of forks against cake plates. But my eyes stayed on the priest. On that envelope. On my lifeline. Sarah had no idea. She thought her triumph was complete. "Mom," she called suddenly, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Heads turned toward me again. "Aren't you happy for me, for us?" My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. A brittle, fragile thing. "Of course." The crowd chuckled. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was nothing. But I kept my gaze steady, not on Sarah, not on the groom's smirking family, but on the letter that held truths waiting to burn their golden fantasy to the ground. Inside that envelope were 3 things: a copy of the original deed to the Lakeview house, proof that my name still carried legal weight. Sarah's refinancing wasn't as airtight as she believed. A notarized letter from the bank manager who had helped me open a private savings account, one Sarah had no knowledge of holding nearly $600,000. My own words handwritten, describing the sacrifices I had made for my daughter. Not legal documents, not numbers, but the kind of truth that cut deeper than contracts ever could. I'd been terrified to write it, terrified to admit even to myself that I might one day need to protect my own dignity from the child I raised. But something inside me had known. Mothers always know, don't they? And now, that letter waited. The priest's eyes lifted briefly, meeting mine across the room. There was something in his gaze, calm, steady, reassuring. He hadn't forgotten. He was waiting. I exhaled slowly, my chest loosening for the first time that night. Then, as if fate wanted to remind me of the storm still raging, the groom's mother rose again. "Darling," she said to Sarah, her voice loud, sweet, poisonous, "don't worry about anything. You're safe now. You don't need to look back at mistakes. You've got a new future, and we'll make sure no one takes it away from you." Her eyes flicked to me, sharp as glass. Mistakes. That's what I was now. I clenched my jaw. My fingers dug into my lap, but I didn't rise. I didn't speak. Not yet. Because sometimes the most powerful move is silence. When you know the truth is coming, when you know the floor will soon crumble beneath your enemy's feet. My granddaughter leaned close again, whispering fiercely, "Grandma, please don't cry. They don't deserve your tears." I pressed her hand gently, whispering back, "I'm not crying. I'm waiting." Her eyes widened. She didn't understand, not yet, but she would, because soon the priest would open that envelope, and when he did, the room would change. Still, as the night dragged on, the humiliation piled higher. Sarah's new in-laws paraded their wealth, talking about their vacation homes in Florida, their $3.5 million lakefront property, their private investments. They spoke as though Sarah had always belonged to them, as if I had never existed. One of them even leaned across the table, smiling condescendingly at me. "You must be relieved, really," she said. "Now that Sarah has stability, you don't have to worry about all those bills you could never manage." I bit back the words rising in my throat, because if I had spoken, then it would have been rage. But I didn't want rage. I wanted revelation. And revelation requires timing. So I sat back, letting the night unfold, letting them dig deeper holes with every cruel word, every smug glance. The more they underestimated me, the sweeter the silence tasted. Because when the moment came, when the priest's voice rang out, letter in hand, they wouldn't just see me. They would see the truth. The truth they couldn't erase, no matter how hard they tried. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of decades pressing down. The nights I walked home in the snow, the meals I skipped, the hours I worked until my hands bled. All of it had brought me here, not to this humiliation, but to this waiting point. Because I knew something they didn't. The storm hadn't passed. It hadn't even begun. The night wore on, each toast and each laugh pressing down on me like bricks, added to a collapsing wall. But beneath that weight, something solid was forming. Not weakness, not despair, resolve. Because while they thought I sat there broken, I was counting. Every cruel word, every smug smile, every slip of arrogance that revealed just how certain they were of their victory. And in my silence, I was building something they couldn't see a case. The priest still had my letter. That was my first weapon. But I knew it couldn't be the only one. If this family wanted to play games with money houses and legal papers, I had to be ready with more than sentiment. I had to be ready with proof. So I stayed quiet. I let them believe they had won. At one point, the groom's father swaggered over to my table, swirling a glass of bourbon in his hand. He leaned down close enough for me to smell the sharp sting of alcohol on his breath. "Don't take it too hard, Margaret," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. "You should be proud, really. You raised her, just enough to hand her over to us. Now we'll give her the life you never could." I met his eyes steady. I didn't blink, and he smirked. "Besides, it's not like you have anything left to lose." I didn't answer. But inside, a voice whispered, "You have no idea what I have left." He walked away, satisfied with my silence. Across the room, Sarah laughed, leaning into her new husband, whispering something that made his whole table erupt with mirth. Her veil shimmered under the chandelier like the crown of a queen. She looked radiant, untouchable. But I remembered every secret she didn't know. The savings, the diner deed, the insurance payout, the letter. And I remembered something else, something even more dangerous than money. People, witnesses, the stranger in the red flannel, my granddaughter. Even the bank manager who had signed those documents for me, who had raised his eyebrows when I insisted on keeping things in my sole name. People had seen me. People knew. All I had to do was gather them. As the music shifted to a slower song, couples drifted to the dance floor. The crowd's attention softened, pulled toward the newlyweds swaying under the lights. That's when I slipped away from the table, my granddaughter at my side. "Grandma, where are we going?" she whispered, clutching my hand. "Just to breathe," I murmured. "Don't worry." We slipped into the hallway, the noise of the ballroom muffled behind the heavy doors. The air smelled of polish and lilies from the floral arrangements. For the first time all night, I could breathe without tasting ash. I leaned against the wall, my chest rising and falling, and looked down at her. Her eyes, wide and defiant, looked so much like her father's, my late son, the one who had always defended me even as a boy. "Grandma," she said softly, "are they going to take your house?" I swallowed. "They think they are. But you're not going to let them, are you?" Her faith was fierce. It lit something in me. I smiled a small, bitter smile. "No, sweetheart, I'm not." I reached into my purse and pulled out a second envelope, not the one I had given the priest, but another thicker, heavier. Inside were copies of every document I had kept hidden: bank statements, the diner deed, the notarized insurance letter. Proof of everything. I carried them because I knew one day I might need them. I pressed the envelope into her hands. "Hold this for me. Don't let anyone see it, not yet." Her eyes widened. "What's in it?" Hope I whispered. "And the truth." She nodded, clutching it tightly to her chest. For the first time all night, I felt steady. When we returned to the ballroom, I slid back into my chair, calm and silent once more. The celebration rolled on: cake, cutting bouquet, toss, the endless clinking of glasses. Sarah barely looked my way anymore, convinced I had been defeated into silence. Good, let her believe that. Because silence is its own weapon. It makes your enemies careless. It makes them arrogant. It makes them loud enough to bury themselves. And that's exactly what they were doing. I listened as Sarah bragged about the renovations she planned for the Lakeview house, tearing down walls, adding a pool, replacing everything old. Each word was another nail in her coffin. She spoke as if the house was already hers, as if nothing could touch her. But I knew the truth. And soon, everyone else would too. The priest caught my gaze again. His fingers tapped the folder where my first letter waited. His eyes told me not yet, but soon. So I sat back, silent, patient. They thought I was cornered. They thought I was finished. But really, I was watching them build the stage for their own downfall. And when the curtain fell, they would never see it coming. The wedding ended with applause and clinking glasses, but for me, it was only the beginning of a darker play. I thought maybe the humiliation would be left behind in that gilded ballroom. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Heavy cream paper, expensive ink addressed to me in handwriting that wasn't my daughter's. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a summons, a family meeting at the Lakeview house, legal matters to be discussed, attendance mandatory. I knew immediately who was behind it. Sarah. The words blurred on the page, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't an invitation. It was an ambush. When the day came, I walked into my own house like a stranger. The living room smelled of lemon polish and fresh paint, as if they were already trying to erase me from the walls. The furniture had been moved, family portraits gone. The place I had built, the place I had bled for, looked like a showroom for strangers. And there they were, Sarah and her new husband, flanked by his parents, sitting tall and smug like they owned the place. A stack of folders lay on the coffee table, thick with papers. A notary sat in the corner briefcase at her feet pen, already uncapped. Mom Sarah said brightly, the way people smile at someone they pity, We just need your signature today. It's nothing complicated, just finalizing what's already been agreed. Her husband leaned forward, sliding the top document toward me. This will make everything official. Clean, easy. I stared at the pages, dense paragraphs, legal language, deeds, transfers, my name printed, but only as a formality. They wanted me to sign away the last shreds of ownership, to erase myself completely. The notary cleared her throat, impatient. Sarah's eyes glittered. It's for the best, Mom. You don't need this house. You don't need any of it. We'll take care of everything now. Take care of everything. The phrase was so familiar, it stung. It was exactly what her father had said to me the night he left. You'll manage. You always do. And just like him, she wasn't offering help. She was offering abandonment. I felt the walls close in. My chest ached. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the rug I'd once saved 3 paychecks to buy. But then I remembered. The envelope. The letter. The documents my granddaughter now kept hidden in her school backpack. Proof that I wasn't as powerless as they believed. Still, I didn't reach for them. Not yet. Because timing is everything. So I picked up the pen. The room seemed to exhale in relief. Sarah smiled triumphant, already turning to the notary. Her husband smirked. His parents exchanged satisfied glances. They thought it was over. But I didn't sign. I set the pen down, slowly, deliberately. Before I agree to anything, I said, my voice steady, I want to hear you say it. Out loud. Sarah frowned. Say what? That you tricked me. That you pushed papers in front of me and told me it was refinancing when it wasn't. The room stiffened. Her husband shifted uncomfortably. His mother pursed her lips. Sarah's smile returned brittle this time. Mom, you're confused. You signed because you wanted to. You knew what it was. No, I said, my voice firmer now. I didn't. A pause. Silence. Then her husband leaned forward, snapping. Why drag this out? Just sign. You're wasting everyone's time. The notary clicked her pen. Sarah sighed dramatically, like a child tired of a game. Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll still live here, of course. We're not throwing you out. She chuckled, eyes cold. Not yet, anyway. The words hit like a slap. Not yet. The mask slipped. For just a second, her true intention glimmered through. They wanted it all. They wanted me gone. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. And for the first time in years, I let silence fill the room like a weapon. Her husband slammed the table. She's stalling. She knows she has nothing. His father chimed in, smug. It's over, Margaret. You lost. Best to accept it. I studied their faces, so sure, so arrogant, so blind. And I thought of the priest still holding my first letter, of the second envelope safe in my granddaughter's hands, of the diner deed. The insurance payout, the savings account. I hadn't lost. They just didn't know the war hadn't even started. Finally, I stood. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. I won't sign today, I said clearly. The room erupted. Sarah shot up from her chair. What do you mean you won't sign? We've been patient. We've explained everything. You don't have a choice. Her husband's face reddened. This is ridiculous. She's senile. The notary shifted uneasily but said nothing, and I, calm, steady, picked up my purse. You think I have no choice? I said softly, looking Sarah straight in the eye. But you're wrong. I always have a choice. And with that, I walked out. Their voices chased me down the hall, angry, mocking, disbelieving, but I didn't turn back, because for the first time since the wedding, I felt something solid beneath my feet. Control. They thought they had won. They thought I was cornered. But the truth was simple. They had shown their hand, and mine was still hidden. The family meeting had ended in shouts, but I didn't care. I walked away from my own house with my head high, clutching my purse like it carried my spine. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the battle was over. They had no idea the war hadn't even begun. A week later, the phone rang. It was the priest. Margaret, he said, his voice calm but firm. It's time. I knew exactly what he meant. The following Sunday, the church was packed. It wasn't just parishioners. Word had spread about the wedding, about the scene, about the whispers of stolen houses and broken families. Small towns thrive on gossip, and mine was no exception. I sat in the front pew, my granddaughter beside me, her little hands clutching her backpack tight. Inside it was the second envelope, the proof I had guarded all these years. She hadn't let it go, not once. Sarah and her husband arrived late, striding down the aisle with smug smiles. His parents followed, dressed in expensive coats that screamed victory. They thought they were walking into a sermon, into a chance to flaunt their new power. But I knew better. The priest stepped up to the pulpit, cleared his throat, and held up a single white envelope. My envelope, the one I had given him before the wedding. Gasps rippled through the pews. People leaned forward, whispering. Everyone knew what it was, even if they didn't know what it said. Sarah stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "What's that?" she demanded, her voice sharp in the quiet church. The priest didn't answer her. Instead, he opened the envelope slowly, carefully, and pulled out the letter. His voice carried steady and clear as he began to read. "My name is Margaret Collins. I am the mother of Sarah, the bride you just celebrated. You may have heard her say that her real family is no longer me. But before you believe her story, I want you to know mine." The church held its breath. The priest read on my words, filling the vaulted ceiling. I raised Sarah alone after her father left when she was 3. I worked 3 jobs cleaning houses, caring for the elderly, sewing clothes just to keep food on the table. I sold the only piece of jewelry I owned so she could wear a prom dress like the other girls. I sold my car to send her to college. Every dime, every meal skipped, every blister on my hands, it was all for her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward Sarah. Her smile faltered. The priest continued. At her wedding, Sarah declared that her real family was no longer me. She humiliated me before hundreds of people. What she did not tell you is that she now claims ownership of my home on Lakeview Avenue. She claims I signed it away. But what she does not know is that I kept copies. I kept proof. And the truth is, the house is not hers. It is mine. Gasps filled the church. The groom's family shifted uneasily. Sarah's face went pale. The priest reached into the envelope again and pulled out a folded document. He held it high for all to see. The original deed, he announced. Still in Margaret's name. Still valid. The room erupted in whispers. Some gasped. Some clapped. Some just stared, eyes wide. Sarah shot to her feet. This is a lie. She doesn't know what she's saying. That deed means nothing. But the priest wasn't done. He unfolded another paper. A notarized letter from the bank he read confirming that Margaret holds a private savings account in her name alone containing over $600,000. The room exploded. Sarah's husband swore under his breath. His parents exchanged frantic glances. And then the final blow. The priest read my closing words. "To my daughter, you may try to erase me, but you cannot erase the truth. I am not useless. I am not gone. I am your mother, and I am stronger than you will ever admit. And to those who laughed at my humiliation, know this. I do not stand alone. I never have." Silence. Heavy. Unbreakable. Then the stranger in the red flannel who had been sitting in the back pew stood. His voice rang out loud and furious. "Shame on you," he shouted, pointing at Sarah and her husband. "Shame on all of you. She gave you everything, and you tried to take more. You should be on your knees thanking her, not stealing from her." Applause erupted. Not polite applause, but raw, righteous clapping. People rose to their feet, nodding, cheering. My granddaughter stood tall beside me, clutching the second envelope like a banner. Sarah's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand. She owes me. She never gave me what I deserved." The crowd turned on her, voices sharp. "She raised you alone. She gave you everything. You're ungrateful." The groom tried to pull her down, but Sarah shook him off, shouting, "It's not true. None of this is true." But the papers in the priest's hands said otherwise. I rose slowly from my pew, my legs steady, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "It is true," I said, clear enough for every ear in that church, every word, and I have more proof if you want it. "Sarah, you cannot take what was never yours." Sarah's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Her cheeks burned red. Her husband stared at her, horrified, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The priest closed the letter and laid it on the pulpit. "The truth has been spoken," he said quietly, "and the truth cannot be undone." The church erupted again, a swell of voices, some cheering, some gasping, all of them alive with the electricity of revelation. And I stood there, no longer silent, no longer erased. The game had turned. And now it was Sarah's turn to taste humiliation. The church was still buzzing after the priest folded my letter back into its envelope. People were whispering, pointing, shaking their heads, but their eyes weren't on me anymore. They were on Sarah, and for the first time I saw fear crack her perfect facade. Her husband grabbed her arm, his voice low but harsh enough that the microphone picked it up. "Did you know about this? The deed, the savings, the bank account. I thought..." Sarah stammered, her face pale. "You thought?" His voice rose, and the congregation heard every word. "You told me the house was already ours. You said she was broke, that she had nothing left." Gasps echoed through the pews. Sarah's mother-in-law stood, her pearls trembling on her chest as she spat the words like venom. "You lied to us. You made us look like fools." "I didn't lie," Sarah shrieked, but her voice cracked. Her hands flailed as though she could physically catch the respect that was slipping through her fingers. She was supposed to sign everything over. The stranger in the red flannel shouted from the back, and she didn't. "Because she's not stupid. Because she's stronger than you'll ever be." Applause roared again, this time angrier, more righteous. The entire church seemed to rise against her. Sarah's husband yanked his arm away. "You humiliated me. You humiliated my family. We paraded around like we owned that house, like we were above her, and all along you knew she still had control." His eyes burned into hers. "Do you know what this does to my reputation?" Sarah's lips trembled. I just wanted..." Her father-in-law cut her off, his voice booming. "You wanted to steal from your own mother, in front of God and everyone else, and you dragged us into it." Every word was a lash, and the more they lashed her, the smaller she seemed. She turned to me, then her eyes wild, desperate. "Mom, tell them it's not as bad as it looks." But I didn't move, because it was as bad as it looked. Worse even. Her husband jabbed a finger toward me. "You think we'll stay married after this? After you humiliated me in front of half the town?" His voice shook with fury. "You're a disgrace." The congregation gasped again. The word divorce hung unspoken in the air, but everyone heard it. Sarah crumbled back into her pew, her perfect white teeth clenched, tears streaming down her face. And then came the final humiliation. The priest turned to me, his voice steady. "Margaret, would you like to reclaim your place in this congregation? Would you like us all to recognize you not as a burden, but as the woman who sacrificed everything for her family?" I rose slowly. My granddaughter slipped her small hand into mine, and I squeezed it. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I want it known that I may have been silent, but I was never weak. I want it known that no mother should be treated like dirt after giving her whole life to her child. And I want it known that the Lakeview house, the house I worked my bones to dust for, is mine, still mine, and it will stay mine until the day I choose otherwise." The church erupted in applause louder than anything before. People stood clapping, some even cheering. The sound rolled over me like a tide cleansing powerful. Sarah's sobs echoed in the corner, but no one rushed to comfort her. Not her husband, not his family, not even her friends who sat frozen ashamed to be associated with her. Her mother-in-law muttered something sharp and stormed out, heels clacking against the church floor. Her father-in-law followed his face dark with disgust. Her husband lingered only a moment longer before shaking his head and walking away, leaving Sarah alone in the pew, mascara streaked down her cheeks. The congregation whispered, "She lost everything. She tried to steal from her own mother. Serves her right." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply stood tall, holding my granddaughter's hand, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Sarah had taken my silence for weakness. She had mistaken my love for naivety. And now, in front of God, neighbors, and strangers, her cruelty had been laid bare. The priest closed the moment with a prayer, his words ringing like judgment. Let this be a lesson that truth will always surface, that betrayal will always crumble, and that a mother's worth is never measured in money, but in the love and sacrifice she gives. When I walked out of the church that morning, the autumn air hit my face like a baptism. Crisp, clean, full of life. The crowd parted for me, some nodding, some touching my shoulder, some whispering, "Good for you, Margaret." Behind me, Sarah trailed alone, broken, abandoned by the very people she thought were her salvation. The house was mine. My dignity was mine. And for the first time in years, so was my strength. The church bells rang faintly in the distance as I walked down the steps, my granddaughter's hand still tucked firmly into mine. The air outside felt different, lighter, sharper, as if the truth itself had cleared the fog that had been suffocating me for years. For so long I had carried shame in silence. For so long I had believed that endurance meant swallowing pain and never speaking of it. But now I knew better. Silence can be strength, but it must lead somewhere. It must prepare for a moment like today when truth speaks louder than lies. We walked past clusters of people still whispering. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Some nodded with approval. But no one looked at me the way they had looked at me at the wedding. No one saw a burden. No one saw a woman useless or past her time. They saw me, the woman who had endured, the mother who had sacrificed, the grandmother who had fought back not with fists or fury, but with truth, with proof, with dignity. My granddaughter squeezed my hand. "Grandma," she whispered, "I knew you'd win." I smiled, blinking back tears. It wasn't about winning, sweetheart. It was about making sure no one forgets who I am, or what I gave. We reached the car, the old Chevy I still drove, dented but reliable. I paused before opening the door, glancing back at the church. Sarah stood in the doorway, alone. Her veil had been discarded. Her makeup smeared, her shoulders hunched, as if the weight of her choices had finally settled on her. For a moment our eyes met. She didn't speak. Neither did I. There was nothing left to say. Because forgiveness cannot be begged for in public humiliation. It has to be earned slowly, painfully, truthfully. And Sarah wasn't there yet. I turned away. That evening, I sat in the Lakeview house. Yes, my house. The sun set through the bay windows, casting golden light across the walls I had painted with my own hands. The furniture was mine again, not props for someone else's triumph. The air smelled of lavender polish, not lemon paint masking over my existence. I brewed a pot of coffee the way I always had. My granddaughter sat at the table, drawing quietly the second envelope still in her backpack, like a shield we no longer needed. I thought of everything, of Michael leaving, of the endless shifts at the nursing home, of the years of hunger and sacrifice. And I thought of the moment Sarah raised her glass and said I wasn't her family. It hurt. God, it hurt, more than any loss of money or property ever could. But I also thought of the priest's voice reading my words aloud, of the crowd standing to their feet, applauding, defending me when no one had at that wedding, of the stranger in the red flannel bold enough to shout the truth, of my granddaughter, small but fierce, the first to stand when I couldn't. I wasn't alone. Not then. Not now. I took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through me. This was my truth. I didn't need anyone's pity. I didn't need anyone's money. I didn't even need Sarah to fall on her knees and beg forgiveness. What I needed, what every parent, every grandparent deserves, was respect. Respect for the years, respect for the sacrifices, respect for the love that had kept her alive long enough to betray me. And if she couldn't give me that, then I would stand without her, because my worth was never tied to her approval. My worth was written in every callus on my hands, every sleepless night, every scar life carved into me. I looked at my granddaughter and smiled. She was watching me quietly, as if she knew I was writing something invisible in the air. "Grandma," she said softly, "will Mom ever change?" I sighed, staring at the fading light outside. Maybe, maybe not. But that's her choice, not mine. My choice is to keep standing, to keep living, to never let anyone make me feel like I'm nothing. She nodded slowly as if she understood more than her 12 years should allow, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The house was mine. My dignity was mine. My future, whatever years I had left, was mine. I wasn't useless. I wasn't erased. I was Margaret Collins, a mother, a grandmother, a survivor. And if the world remembered nothing else, let them remember this: I didn't need their wealth. I didn't need their pity. All I needed was respect. And finally, I had reclaimed it.